She had no idea that in 6 hours her husband would be filming her destruction. Harper Sinclair stood in front of the bedroom mirror at 4 in the afternoon, smoothing the ivory silk over her belly, 7 months swollen with a daughter who kicked every time classical music played. The dress had cost $14,000, custom-tailored to make her look elegant despite the pregnancy, and she'd chosen it because Mason said white made her glow. The fall light through their penthouse windows caught the fabric just right, and for a moment she looked like someone who belonged in this life, the tech CEO's wife, the woman who'd helped build a $200 million empire from nothing. She didn't know that the empire was a lie, that the husband was a thief, that in 6 hours every person she'd ever trusted would watch her humiliated in a ballroom while the man she loved smiled and pressed record. But that knowledge was coming. It was already in motion, rolling toward her like a freight train she couldn't see. For now she adjusted the dress one last time, ran her fingers through honey blonde hair she'd worn in a simple bun because Mason preferred her understated, and tried to ignore the flutter of anxiety in her chest that had nothing to do with the baby. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand. Mason's name lit up the screen. "Can't wait to show you off tonight. You're my everything." She smiled, the kind of smile that came easy after 10 years of marriage, after a decade of believing that love meant supporting someone else's dreams, even when your own got smaller and smaller until they fit in the corner of his shadow. She typed back, "See you there. I love you." The phone went dark. The room was quiet except for the hum of Manhattan traffic 47 floors below, and Harper Sinclair, brilliant, talented, invisible Harper, had no idea she was about to lose everything. 10 years earlier, the Stanford Computer Science Lab smelled like burnt coffee and the particular desperation of students who'd been debugging code since dawn. Harper sat at a corner workstation, fingers flying across the keyboard, her mind deep in an algorithm that would revolutionize medical supply logistics if she could just solve the routing problem that had stumped her for 3 weeks. She was 22, wearing a gray Stanford hoodie that had seen better days, jeans with a rip in the knee from climbing fences to photograph sunsets, and sneakers held together with optimism and duct tape. Her hair was pulled into a messy ponytail, her face bare of makeup, her posture the slouch of someone who'd forgotten that bodies needed rest. Nobody in this lab knew her real name was Harper Montgomery, daughter of Victor Montgomery, who owned 12 newspapers and 3 television networks and had a net worth that made Stanford's endowment look modest. She'd spent 4 years hiding behind her mother's maiden name, Sinclair, living in regular dorms on a scholarship she didn't need, driving a beat-up Honda Civic that had belonged to her high school chemistry teacher. She wanted to be normal, wanted to earn respect through work, not inheritance, wanted to prove she was more than money wrapped in pretty packaging. The lab door opened at 11:15 and Mason Cole walked in like he owned every room he entered, which, in fairness, he usually tried to. 28 years old, founder and CEO of Blackstone Logistics, a medical supply company that was hemorrhaging cash but had the kind of pitch deck that made venture capitalists reach for their checkbooks. He wore a navy suit that probably cost more than Harper's monthly rent. His dark hair styled with product that caught the fluorescent lights, and he had the particular confidence of men who'd learned early that charm could open doors, talent couldn't. He scanned the lab until his eyes landed on Harper, still typing, still lost in her code. "You're still here," his voice carried across the empty space. "Most students clear out by 9. Harper didn't look up. Her fingers kept moving. Most students aren't debugging a routing algorithm that'll save hospitals 40% on medical supply delivery. Mason stopped walking. The tone shifted. She'd said something that mattered. "You built that for who?" "For myself. Thesis project." "Can I see it?" Harper paused, saved her work, and turned the laptop toward him. Mason leaned over her shoulder close enough that she could smell expensive cologne and coffee, and watched as she clicked through screens of code and visualization models that showed delivery routes optimizing in real time. He spent 10 minutes asking questions that proved he understood logistics better than most Stanford professors. She spent 10 minutes answering in a way that proved she understood computer science better than most Silicon Valley engineers. When they finished, Mason straightened up and pulled a business card from his wallet, the motion smooth and practiced. "I'm hiring interns for the summer. $25 an hour. You'd be working directly with my development team." Harper looked at the card without touching it. "I don't need money." His eyebrows lifted. Not many Stanford students turn down paid work. "But I need real-world data to test this. You give me access to your logistics system, I'll optimize it for free." "Free." Mason repeated the word like it was foreign. "Why would you work for free?" "Because if it works, I get an A+ on my thesis. If it fails, I learn why. Either way, I win." She met his eyes for the first time, and something passed between them that wasn't quite attraction, but wasn't quite professional either. It was recognition, two ambitious people who saw in each other a tool, a stepping stone, a way forward. Mason smiled, and it was the kind of smile that Harper would later learn meant he'd just found something valuable. "I'll send you the credentials tomorrow. Welcome to Blackstone Logistics." She took the business card, her first mistake. 6 months later, Harper had rebuilt Blackstone's entire routing system from the ground up. She'd spent December through May living between Stanford classes and Mason's cramped office in San Jose, writing code until 3 in the morning and then stumbling to lectures on 4 hours of sleep. She'd missed her college graduation ceremony because Mason needed her to present the new system to a potential hospital client in Chicago. And by the time she realized she'd sacrificed that milestone, it felt too late to care. The algorithm she'd built reduced delivery times from 48 hours to 24. It cut fuel costs by 38%. It increased accuracy to 99.7%, which in medical logistics meant the difference between life and death. She'd also designed the hub system that would become Blackstone's signature innovation. After analyzing 6 months of delivery data, Harper had discovered that 70% of medical orders passed through just 3 cities, New York, Chicago, and Dallas. She'd proposed building dedicated hubs in each location, mini warehouses optimized for rapid processing and dispatch. Mason had loved the idea. He'd taken it to the board, presented it as his own vision, and secured $2.3 million in funding to build the first hub in Jersey City. Harper found out about the presentation from the company newsletter. Her name wasn't mentioned once. She confronted him in his office on a Tuesday morning, the kind of gray January day when San Francisco fog made everything feel uncertain. "I saw the board meeting notes. You said you designed the hub system." Mason looked up from his laptop, expression shifting from surprise to something practiced and smooth. "I said we designed it, as a team. The notes say, Mason's vision for hub-based logistics. My name isn't there. Harper." He stood up, came around the desk, and put his hand on her shoulder in a gesture that was probably meant to be reassuring, but felt like being patted by a teacher explaining why she couldn't sit at the adult table. "Investors need to trust the CEO. They need to believe I have the strategic vision to execute. You're brilliant at technology, but you don't understand how venture capital works. If I walk into that room and say our 23-year-old intern designed this, they'll think we're a joke. I'm not an intern anymore. I graduated. You know what I mean. They need confidence. I'm giving them confidence by taking credit for my work." Mason's hand dropped from her shoulder. His voice cooled by exactly 5 degrees. "I'm protecting you. Investors are sharks. They'll tear you apart, question every assumption, make you defend every choice. Let me handle the business side. You handle the tech. That's how successful companies work." Harper looked at him. This man she'd been working beside for 6 months, whose company she'd saved from irrelevance, whose vision for logistics couldn't have existed without her algorithms, and she made her second mistake. She believed him. She believed that protecting her meant erasing her. That partnership meant invisibility. That love, because somewhere in those late nights and shared takeout and moments when he'd look at her code and say, "You're brilliant," like he meant it, love meant making herself smaller so he could be bigger. She nodded, went back to her desk, kept writing code. 3 months later, Mason proposed. They married in the summer of 2016, a small ceremony on a Napa Valley vineyard that Harper chose because the light was beautiful and Mason chose because tech investors loved wine country weddings. 50 guests, mostly Mason's contacts from the industry, a handful of Harper's Stanford friends who still returned her calls. Her parents weren't there. Victor Montgomery had come to San Francisco 3 months before the wedding taken. One look at Mason Cole and told his daughter in the private room of a restaurant that cost more than most people's monthly rent. "He doesn't love you. He loves what you can build for him." Harper had stood up, hands shaking, voice tight. "You don't know him. You've never given him a chance. I know men like him. I've destroyed them in boardrooms for 30 years. He sees opportunity, not a person." "You're wrong." Victor had watched his only daughter walk out, and he'd made a decision that would echo through the next decade. He wouldn't force her to see the truth. He'd wait. And when she finally opened her eyes, he'd be ready with every weapon she'd need. But Harper didn't know about her father's patience or his plans. She only knew that her wedding day was bright and warm, that Mason's vows were beautiful, something about partnership and building dreams together, and that when he kissed her in front of 50 witnesses, she felt like she'd finally found the thing she'd been searching for since childhood: belonging, purpose, love. All three were illusions, but illusions can sustain you for years if you believe hard enough. The marriage settled into a pattern that Harper told herself was normal. Mason threw himself into Blackstone with the intensity of someone who knew he was one funding round away from either breakthrough or bankruptcy. Harper wrote code, managed the engineering team. Mason assembled, negotiated with hospital systems that needed logistics solutions, and gradually transformed from the Stanford grad who'd offered free work into the invisible architect behind every innovation Blackstone claimed. By 2018, the company was worth $50 million. By 2020, it had expanded to 12 states. By 2024, the valuation had hit $200 million, and Mason Cole was being interviewed on CNBC about the future of medical logistics. Harper watched from their penthouse as he told the host about his vision, his innovations, his strategic brilliance, her work, her code, her late nights and sacrificed friendships, and the particular exhaustion that came from building something beautiful and watching someone else sign their name to it. Her business card said, "Executive Assistant to CEO." Her salary was $85,000 a year, while Mason made $2.5 million plus bonuses. She worked from a desk in the corner of his office because Blackstone didn't have space for her own workspace, and when investors came for meetings, Mason would ask her to take notes like she was administrative support rather than the person who'd written 80% of the code that made those investors interested. She drove the same Honda Civic from Stanford, now 14 years old and held together with determination. Mason drove an Aston Martin Vantage that had cost $180,000 of company money, categorized as a business expense because he sometimes drove it to client meetings. She wore dresses from Target and Macy's neutral colors that helped her blend into backgrounds. Mason wore Brioni suits and Rolex watches and the particular confidence of men who've learned that looking successful is halfway to being successful. And Harper told herself this was fine. This was marriage. This was partnership. You sacrificed for the person you loved, you supported their dreams, you made yourself smaller because that's what good wives did. She told herself this even as her Stanford friends stopped calling because she'd canceled too many coffee dates. Even as her own parents became strangers because she couldn't face their disappointment. Even as she looked in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back, 30 years old, pregnant, invisible. The baby kicked against her ribs as if to say, "Mom, wake up." But Harper wasn't ready to wake up. Not yet. That would take something catastrophic, something so humiliating in public that denial became impossible. That something was 6 hours away. The Blackstone Technologies' 5th anniversary gala was held at the Grand Royale Hotel, a Manhattan landmark where chandeliers cost more than most people's houses, and the waiting list for events stretched 18 months. Mason had pulled strings, called in favors, and paid premium rates to secure the ballroom for October 15th. Harper arrived at 7:30, Mason beside her in the town car, his hand on her knee in a gesture that might have been affectionate if it weren't so absent-minded. "Big night." His voice carried that particular tension she'd learned meant he was calculating odds, measuring outcomes, preparing for a performance. "Chen is here. BlackRock. 3 hospital systems we've been courting. This is where we close deals." Harper adjusted her dress, the ivory silk that had taken 3 fittings to get right. We've worked hard for this. I've worked hard for this. The correction was automatic, reflexive. Then he seemed to catch himself, squeezed her knee. We. Sorry. Long day. The car stopped. The door opened. Flash of cameras from photographers Mason's PR team had arranged because successful CEOs arrived to events with fanfare. The ballroom was exactly the kind of beautiful that money could buy and taste could arrange. 400 guests in evening wear, servers circulating with champagne and hors d'oeuvres that had been flown in from somewhere with too many syllables, a string quartet playing Vivaldi because Mason thought classical music made people feel wealthy. Harper took a glass of sparkling water. No alcohol, not 7 months pregnant, and tried to make herself comfortable in a room full of people who saw her as Mason's accessory rather than Blackstone's foundation. Sophie Chen found her near the ice sculpture, a massive swan melting slowly under ballroom lights. "You look beautiful." Sophie had been Harper's roommate at Stanford back when Harper was still just a computer science student who ate ramen and stayed up until 3 arguing about whether artificial intelligence would save humanity or doom it. Now Sophie was a freelance photographer hired tonight to document the gala and one of maybe 3 people in this room who still saw Harper as a person rather than a pregnant decoration. "I look pregnant." Harper smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "How's the photography business?" "Good. Busy. I shot a wedding in Sonoma last weekend, couple who'd been engaged for 8 years and finally decided to just do it at City Hall with 6 people. Most genuine ceremony I've ever documented." Something in the way Sophie said it, most genuine, landed like a small accusation. "Things with Mason are good." Harper said it reflexively, the kind of defensive statement that came from years of people asking questions with their eyes rather than their mouths. "I didn't say they weren't." "But you were thinking it." Sophie adjusted her camera, the motion buying her a moment to choose words carefully. "I think you gave up a lot for this company. And I think Mason doesn't remember how much." "He remembers." "Does he?" Sophie's voice was gentle but firm, the tone of someone who loved you enough to risk your anger. "Harper, I've shot 70 corporate events in the last 2 years. I've seen how successful CEOs treat their partners. Mason doesn't look at you like you matter. He looks at you like you're part of the set design." Harper's chest tightened, the baby kicked sharp enough to hurt. "I need to find the restroom." She walked away before Sophie could respond, before the words could sink in deeper than she was ready to handle. The ballroom was crowded enough that moving through it required navigation sidesteps and excuse-me's and careful maneuvering of her pregnant belly through gaps between conversations about stock prices and merger opportunities and the particular brand of ambition that made tech money. She found a space near the 12-foot ice sculpture away from the densest clusters of people and tried to catch her breath. The champagne glass in her hand was sweating condensation, and she watched a droplet slide down the stem while willing her heartbeat to slow down. Sophie was wrong. Had to be wrong. Mason loved her. He'd said so in his wedding vows, in 1,000 small moments over 10 years, in the way he'd held her hand when she told him about the pregnancy. Except that memory, him holding her hand after the positive test, didn't quite line up with Sophie's words. Because what had his face shown when she'd told him? Shock, yes. But underneath that, just for a second, something that looked like calculation, like he was adjusting plans, measuring new variables, figuring out how this news changed the trajectory of his carefully mapped future. She'd told herself he was overwhelmed, happy in a way that took time to process. But what if Sophie was right? What if he'd been calculating from the beginning? What if the last 10 years had been nothing but a long con, and she'd been too in love to see it? The champagne glass slipped from her fingers. 3 seconds of freefall before crystal shattered against marble. The sound cut through Vivaldi and conversation like a gunshot through silk, sharp and unexpected and wrong. 400 heads turned in perfect synchronization, pulled by the human instinct to identify threats, locate problems, witness disaster. Harper stood frozen, one hand moving instinctively to her belly, the other still curved as if holding the ghost of the glass. Ice water pooled at her feet, and she felt the attention of every person in the ballroom land on her like a physical weight. Then she felt something else. Fingers on her back. Someone behind her close enough to touch and not in the accidental brushing that came from crowded parties. Someone was pulling at her zipper. Harper spun around, heel catching on her hem, balance precarious with 7 months of extra weight shifting her center of gravity. She didn't fall, but it was close. Isabella Cross stood behind her. 29 years old, vice president of marketing at Blackstone, perfect, in the way of women who'd learned young that beauty was currency and spent accordingly. Her dress was red, not ivory, not subtle, but the kind of aggressive scarlet that demanded attention. Her blonde hair fell in waves that had probably taken 2 hours to achieve. Her smile stretched wide across flawless makeup, and there was something in her eyes that Harper had never seen before. Hunger, victory, the particular cruelty of someone who'd been waiting months for this exact moment. "What are you doing?" Harper's voice came out wrong, too high, too confused, too much like prey recognizing a predator. Isabella didn't answer with words. Her hand moved faster than Harper could process, and the zipper gave way with a sound that seemed impossibly loud in the sudden silence. The string quartet kept playing for 3 more seconds, muscle memory overriding awareness, and then even they stopped. The silence was worse than any sound. "Let's see what Mason's been stuck with for 10 years. Isabella's voice carried across the ballroom, amplified by something Harper couldn't see, but would later learn was a wireless microphone carefully planted, deliberately arranged. "Let's see what he's been forced to come home to every single night while dreaming of something better." The dress fell. Harper grabbed at ivory silk with desperate hands, caught some of it, missed the rest. Her slip. Her maternity bra with its functional clasps. Her pregnant belly exposed under chandelier light imported from Venice, displayed for 400 people who'd spent the evening pretending she mattered. The stretch marks she'd been self-conscious about were suddenly visible to everyone she knew. The vulnerability of pregnancy, the private transformation of her body, became public spectacle. She heard gasps ripple through the crowd, heard laughter, actual laughter from people she'd hosted at charity events, people she'd considered friends, people who'd smiled at her and asked about the baby and said supportive things that turned out to be nothing but social performance. She heard the distinctive click of phone cameras, dozens of them capturing her humiliation from every possible angle. 400 witnesses with 400 recording devices documenting the moment Harper Sinclair's life fractured into before and after. She searched the crowd for her husband, eyes sweeping across familiar faces that had gone carefully blank. Board members she'd entertained at dinner parties. Investors she'd charmed with presentations she'd written, but Mason had delivered. Wives she'd organized charity drives with women who'd said, "We should have coffee," and never meant it. And then she found him. Mason stood 20 feet away, navy suit tailored in Milan, dark hair silvering elegantly at the temples, the distinguished look of a man who'd made something of himself through intelligence and drive, the man she'd married 10 years ago in Napa Valley sunshine. The man who'd promised in front of 50 witnesses and whatever God was listening to shield her from every storm life might bring. He was holding up his phone, recording, smiling. Not a shocked smile, not a confused smile, not the expression of a husband seeing his pregnant wife humiliated and instinctively moving to protect her. This was the satisfied smile of someone watching a plan come together exactly as intended. The smile of someone who'd been waiting for this moment, engineering it, counting down to it. "Mason." His name tore from her throat like something with claws. "Mason, help me, please." He didn't lower the phone. He adjusted the angle instead, made sure he was getting the full scene, her exposed body, her desperate hands clutching torn fabric, her face contorted with confusion that was rapidly becoming horror. Isabella circled her slowly, deliberately, a predator who'd already won, but wanted to savor the moment. "Poor thing. Did you really think he loved you? Did you really believe any of it was real?" Harper couldn't speak. Her throat had closed around words that wouldn't come. The baby kicked hard against her ribs, once, twice, 3 times, responding to the cortisol and adrenaline flooding through Harper's system. "He's been mine for 18 months. Every conference where he was too busy to call. Every late night at the office. Every time he said he was too tired to touch you." Isabella stopped directly in front of Harper, close enough that Harper could smell expensive perfume layered over something harder underneath. "He was with me. Every single time." Harper's knees buckled. A server caught her elbow. Young man, maybe 22, face pale with shock, the only person in the room who seemed horrified rather than entertained. "Ma'am," his voice shook. "Ma'am, let me help you." Harper clutched the torn fabric to her chest with one hand, gripped his arm with the other. The baby kicked again, distressed, scared, just like her mother. "Someone call security." The words came out steadier than Harper felt some survival instinct kicking in beneath the humiliation. "Please, someone." The string quartet sat frozen with bows suspended in midair. Bartenders had stopped pouring drinks. Catering staff stood motionless with trays of canapés growing cold in their hands. 400 people stared with the particular attention of witnesses to disaster, horrified but unable to look away. Security was already moving, but not toward Isabella, toward Harper. Marcus Chen appeared at her side, head of security for the Grand Royale, a man Harper had personally approved a Christmas bonus for just last December, a man she'd written a thank you note to for his dedication to making guests feel safe. "Ma'am," his voice was professional, controlled, the voice of someone following orders. "We need you to leave. You're causing a disturbance." The words didn't make sense. Couldn't make sense. "I'm causing a disturbance." Harper's voice scraped her throat raw. "She just attacked me. She just ripped my clothes off in front of everyone, and I'm causing a disturbance." "Ma'am." Marcus took her arm, his grip firm and professional and utterly impersonal. "Please come with us. We can discuss this privately." Harper looked at him, really looked, and saw his jaw was tight. His eyes wouldn't meet hers. He knew. He knew what was happening, knew it was wrong, and he was doing it anyway because that's what people did when someone with power gave orders. "I'm his wife." The statement felt absurd, leaving her mouth like she needed to remind someone, like she needed to prove she belonged here. "I'm Mason's wife. This is supposed to be our party, our celebration." Not for long. Mason finally spoke, voice carrying across the ballroom with the same confidence he used in boardroom presentations. He was still filming, still smiling. "I want this documented for legal purposes. My mentally unstable wife attacked my colleague in front of 400 witnesses. Everyone here saw it." The crowd shifted, a collective movement toward agreement that felt choreographed even though Harper knew it wasn't. They were just doing what crowds always did, following the person with the loudest voice, the most authority, the best claim to truth. "She just grabbed her," someone said from the left side of the room, a woman's voice Harper recognized. Margaret Holloway, maybe. They'd served on 3 charity boards together. "The poor girl was just standing there." Male voice deeper from the right. "Richard something. She'd danced with him at last year's gala." "Pregnancy hormones. My sister went completely crazy during her 3rd trimester. Attacked her husband with a frying pan. Some women just can't handle the hormonal changes." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the room like a wave picking up speed and momentum. Harper felt reality shifting underneath her, the ground becoming unstable. Everyone agreeing that she was the problem. She was unstable. She had attacked when she was the one bleeding from invisible wounds. The room spun. The chandeliers blurred into streaks of light. Her vision darkened at the edges, closing in like tunnel vision, like drowning. The baby kicked again, harder this time, as if trying to wake her from a nightmare. But this wasn't a nightmare. This was real. This was her life fracturing in front of 400 witnesses, and somewhere in the chaos of her shattering world, Harper noticed something no one else did. Sophie Chen stood against the back wall, camera raised but not pointed at Harper. Pointed at the crowd, at Mason, at Isabella, at the security guards, at every face that watched and did nothing, recording everything, every angle, every witness, every moment of complicity. Harper didn't know it yet, but that footage would save her, would prove what really happened when everyone who'd been here tonight conveniently forgot the truth. For now, security escorted her through a service entrance, through industrial hallways that smelled of dish soap and hot food, past kitchen staff who averted their eyes and servers who whispered to each other as she passed. Someone draped a coat over her shoulders, heavy wool men's cut, probably belonged to one of the valets. Someone else handed her a pair of flats, black plain size, too small but better than nothing. The October air hit her face like a slap when they pushed through the service exit. cold, sharp, real in a way nothing else felt real anymore. She stood on the sidewalk outside the Grand Royale Hotel barefoot. Despite the flats she'd dropped somewhere, her phone and purse and dignity still inside the ballroom with everyone who'd watched her destroyed. A black sedan pulled up to the curb. Samuel Rodriguez emerged from the driver's seat, 62 years old, with the Montgomery family for 30 years. He'd taught Harper to drive when she was 16, picked her up from college when she was homesick, driven her to her wedding 10 years ago knowing it was a mistake, but loving her too much to say so. He took one look at her face and didn't ask a single question. Simply opened the door, helped her inside with gentle hands, turned the heat up high, handed her a bottle of water and a package of tissues from the center console where he kept them for exactly these moments. "Where to, Miss Harper?" She opened her mouth to say, home, the penthouse, the address she shared with Mason, where her clothes hung next to his, and their wedding photos still held pride of place on the mantel. The word wouldn't come. "My parents' house." Her voice sounded like it belonged to someone else, someone far away, someone drowning. "Take me home, Samuel. Take me to my real home." He nodded. Once made a phone call on his Bluetooth in low tones she couldn't quite hear, probably alerting her parents that their daughter was coming back broken. Harper pressed her forehead against the cool glass and watched Manhattan lights blur past orange and white and red neon signs advertising restaurants and bars and nightclubs where normal people were having normal nights, where the world kept spinning while hers had stopped. She didn't cry, not yet. That would come later in the safety of her childhood bedroom in her mother's arms. For now she calculated exit points like she'd been trained to do, assessed witnesses and evidence and legal options, thought about the prenuptial agreement she'd signed 10 years ago without really reading because she'd been in love and Mason had said it was just a formality. She was already planning while dying inside. That's what women do. That's what survivors do. They plan, they calculate. They find the next handhold while still falling. The sedan pulled through iron gates her great-grandfather had installed up a winding drive lined with oak trees that had watched Montgomery children grow up for 6 generations, past the fountain where she'd caught fireflies as a child, to the house where she'd learned to walk and read and believe that the world was fair and just and good. Her mother waited at the door. Diane Montgomery stood in the doorway with light spilling out behind her, 58 years old, but looking a decade younger, dressed in silk pajamas and a cashmere robe, hair still perfectly styled despite the hour. 23 years as a federal prosecutor, she'd put away cartel leaders and corporate criminals and men who thought their money made them untouchable. One look at Harper's face and every instinct came roaring back. "Inside, now! We have work to do." The door closed behind them. The nightmare was just beginning. But so was something else. Something Mason Cole hadn't anticipated when he'd smiled and pressed record while his pregnant wife's dress fell to the floor. Justice. Methodical, patient, absolutely ruthless justice. The kind that took time to build, but destroyed completely when it finally arrived. Harper didn't know it yet, but her father had been preparing for this moment for 8 years. Had anticipated it, documented it, weaponized it. Mason thought he'd destroyed his wife tonight. He'd actually just signed his own death warrant. The Montgomery estate smelled like safety, wood fires crackling in every fireplace, her father's pipe tobacco cherry-scented and familiar from childhood, her mother's jasmine perfume applied even at 2 in the morning, because Diane Montgomery never appeared less than composed. Old books and older money, the particular stillness of a house where nothing bad had ever been allowed to happen. Harper made it to the foyer before her legs gave out. Her knees hit hardwood that her ancestors had walked on for 6 generations. The impact jarred through her spine, made her pregnant belly shift awkwardly, sent a spike of pain through joints that were already stressed from carrying extra weight. She caught herself on her hands, palms slapping against wood, and felt the first real sob building in her chest like a wave that had been held back too long. Diane caught her before she could collapse completely. Strong arms wrapping around her daughter, holding her upright, taking her weight with the same competence she'd brought to courtrooms for 2 decades. "I've got you." Diane's voice was steady, controlled, the voice she'd used when witnesses broke down on the stand. "I've got you, baby. You're safe now." Harper started shaking. Not crying yet. Not that final surrender, just shaking with full-body tremors that rattled her teeth and made her vision blur. The wool coat someone had thrown over her shoulders smelled like cigarettes and kitchen grease, and she wanted to take it off but couldn't make her hands work properly. He was smiling. The words came out in gasps between breaths that wouldn't steady. Mom, he was smiling while he filmed it. Like it was funny. Like I was funny. Like our whole marriage was just a joke he'd been waiting to tell. I know. How can you know you weren't there? Nobody who loved me was there. Diane smoothed Harper's hair back from her face, the gesture maternal and fierce, and exactly what Harper needed. I know because I've seen men like Mason destroy women for sport. I know because your father and I have been watching him for 8 years. And I know because we've been preparing for exactly this moment since the day you married him. Harper looked up, met her mother's eyes, saw something there that cut through the shock. You knew he was going to do this. We knew he was going to do something. Men like Mason can't help themselves. They always overreach, always push too far. We just had to wait for him to show his hand. Footsteps in the hallway, heavy and measured. Victor Montgomery appeared in the doorway of his study, 61 years old, with silver hair that had once been the same honey blonde as Harper's reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, wearing the ancient cardigan he'd owned since Harper was a child. The man who'd built a $4 billion media empire from a single failing newspaper. The man who'd never once raised his voice to his daughter, but had ended careers with a phone call when necessary. He was looking at Harper now with an expression she'd never seen before. Controlled fury underneath perfect calm, the face of someone who'd been waiting 8 years to unleash something terrible and was finally being given permission. Harper, come sit down. We have things to discuss. They moved to the study, Diane keeping one arm around Harper's shoulders, Victor leading the way. The room was exactly as Harper remembered from childhood, leather chairs worn soft with decades of use, mahogany desk that her great-great-grandfather had shipped from England, walls lined with books that Victor had actually read every single one of, with notes in the margins and dog-eared pages. The faint scent of the scotch he drank in measured sips while working late. Harper sank into the chair nearest the fire, the same chair where she'd sat when she was 10, and her hamster died when she was 16 and didn't get into her first choice college when she was 25, and her first serious relationship ended when she was 27 and Mason Cole asked her to marry him. Diane draped a cashmere blanket over Harper's shoulders, the same blanket that had comforted her through every childhood illness, soft and warm and smelling faintly of lavender. Tell us everything. Victor sat across from her, not behind his desk where he conducted business, but across from her where he'd always sat when listening to his daughter's problems. From the beginning, leave nothing out. Harper tried. The words came in fragments, shattered pieces of a shattered night. The gala was beautiful, everything perfect, flowers and music and food. Mason seemed happy networking, shaking hands, being charming. She'd been proud of him, proud to be his wife. Then, standing by the ice sculpture glass, slipping from her fingers, Isabella pulling at her dress, the microphone amplifying cruelty for 400 witnesses. Mason was recording. He wasn't shocked or confused or trying to help. He was standing there with his phone out, filming everything, smiling like he'd been waiting for this moment, like this was the plan all along. Her parents exchanged a look, quick and meaningful, the kind of look that couples develop after decades of marriage, a whole conversation in a single glance. Harper. Victor leaned forward, voice careful now, measured the voice of someone about to deliver information that would reshape reality. How much do you know about Blackstone's actual financial position? The question made no sense. What? Your husband's company. What do you know about its finances? It's worth $200 million. Maybe more. We don't really discuss business at home. Mason always said he preferred to keep work and personal life separate, didn't want to burden me with the stress. Another look between her parents, longer this time, heavier. Sweetheart. Victor reached into his desk drawer, pulled out a folder thick and worn at the edges like it had been handled hundreds of times. Your husband isn't just a cheater. He's a fraud, and he's been planning this night for a very long time. The word hit like a physical blow. Fraud. Her husband, the father of her unborn child, the man she'd spent 10 years supporting and believing in and making herself smaller for. I don't understand. Victor opened the folder, spread contents across his desk like a prosecutor laying out evidence. Photographs, dozens of them. Mason and Isabella in restaurants, in hotels, in the back of cars, holding hands, kissing, looking at each other the way he used to look at Harper back when she believed he loved her. Bank statements showing accounts Harper had never heard of, transfers to companies with names that meant nothing, numbers with too many zeros. Email printouts, conversations between Mason and people Harper didn't recognize, discussions of shell companies and offshore accounts and exit strategies. A timeline, 18 months long, every meeting documented, every transaction recorded, every lie cataloged with the precision of someone who'd been building a case for federal prosecution. I've known since your second trimester. Victor's voice was heavy with something that might have been regret. I hired private investigators when you first told us about the pregnancy. Something felt wrong. The way Mason reacted when you shared the news, the way he looked at you like you'd handed him a problem instead of a gift. Harper thought back to that moment, the positive pregnancy test, the tears of joy Mason's face when she told him. She'd thought he was shocked, overwhelmed, happy in a way that made words inadequate. Now she saw it differently. The quick calculation behind his eyes, the forced smile, the way he'd immediately started talking about financial planning and prenuptial considerations and practical matters. He hadn't been happy. He'd been adjusting his timeline. The affair started 14 months before you got pregnant. Diane picked up one of the photographs, Mason and Isabella at a restaurant. Harper didn't recognize both of them, laughing, comfortable, intimate. Isabella Drake was brought into the company specifically for this purpose. She's not just his mistress, she's his partner in financial fraud. But why, if the company is successful, why commit fraud? Why risk everything? Because the company isn't successful. Victor pulled another document from the folder, a spreadsheet covered in red numbers that Harper's code-trained brain immediately recognized as catastrophic. Blackstone Technologies has been insolvent for over 2 years. Your husband has been running an elaborate Ponzi scheme, moving money between shell companies, falsifying earnings reports, lying to investors and board members and government regulators. The room tilted. Harper gripped the arms of her chair, tried to find solid ground in a world that had just revealed itself to be quicksand. The $800 million merger with NextGen that's supposed to close Monday. Diane continued, her prosecutor voice fully engaged, now laying out a case with the ruthlessness she'd brought to cartel trials. That's his escape hatch. His plan was to complete the merger, cash out his position, and disappear before anyone discovered the fraud. He's been building toward this for years. Harper's hand moved to her belly, the baby kicking weakly in response to her mother's stress. But what does that have to do with tonight? With what he did to me? Her parents looked at each other again, and this time Harper saw something else in their expressions, something that looked almost like pain. Sweetheart. Diane sat on the arm of Harper's chair, took her daughter's hand. Your prenuptial agreement states that in case of divorce you receive 30% of his company's value, plus your trust fund remains completely intact and protected. I know that. We had lawyers review everything. It seemed fair. If the company is worthless because of fraud, 30% of nothing is nothing. You'd walk away with only your trust fund. Okay, that's still $150 million. That's not nothing. No, it's not. Diane squeezed Harper's hand and her voice dropped to something gentler but no less devastating. But if you were declared mentally incompetent before the divorce could be finalized, the prenup would be void. A court-appointed guardian would manage your assets, including your trust fund. The pieces clicked together slowly, horribly, like watching a car crash in slow motion. Tonight wasn't random cruelty. Harper's voice came out as a whisper. He wanted witnesses, documentation, proof that I was unstable. Yes. He wanted to have me committed, to take my money, to take... She stopped, her hand pressed against her belly where her daughter kicked again, stronger this time, insistent. To take my baby. Victor's jaw tightened until the muscles stood out like cords. We found draft paperwork on his computer. A petition for emergency psychiatric commitment. names of doctors willing to testify that you showed signs of prenatal psychosis, a letter nominating Isabella Drake as your financial guardian. The room went silent, except for the fire crackling and the grandfather clock in the corner ticking steadily, marking seconds that felt like hours. Somewhere outside, an owl called a car passed on the distant road, normal sounds from a normal world that no longer existed for Harper Montgomery Sinclair. She'd thought the worst moment of her life was standing half-naked in front of 400 people while her husband filmed her humiliation. She was wrong. The worst moment was now learning that the man she'd married, the father of her child, the person she'd trusted more than anyone in the world, had been planning to steal everything she loved, her money, her sanity, her daughter, her entire future. It wasn't betrayal. It was attempted murder of her entire existence. "What do we do?" Her voice came out steady, stronger than she felt, stronger than she had any right to feel. "How do we stop him?" Victor smiled for the first time all night, and it reminded Harper why powerful men had learned to fear her father. "We don't have to stop him, sweetheart. He stopped himself tonight." He pulled another folder from his desk, thicker than the first, and Harper recognized the weight of something comprehensive and devastating. "Tonight he gave us everything we needed, everything I've been waiting 18 months to get. The attack, the video he made, the witnesses he thought he'd bought, it's all evidence now. Evidence of conspiracy, evidence of assault, evidence of fraud and attempted financial abuse." He opened the folder to reveal federal forms, legal filings, evidence summaries organized with the precision of someone who'd been preparing for war. "By morning, Mason Cole won't have a company. He won't have freedom. And he won't have anything that belongs to you, not your money, not your reputation, and certainly not your daughter." Harper looked at her father, at her mother, at the documents spread across the desk like weapons waiting to be deployed. She thought about Mason's smile, his certainty, his absolute confidence that he'd won. He didn't know about the investigators, didn't know about 18 months of surveillance, didn't know that his father-in-law had been building a case against him while he built his own case against Harper. He thought he was the hunter. He was about to learn he'd been the prey all along. Her phone buzzed. Not her phone, her mother's phone. Diane checked the screen and her lip curled with disgust. "It's him, Mason. He wants to talk to you." Harper took the phone, read the message. "Come home and we can discuss terms, or I release the video publicly. You have until 9 a.m. She read it again, then once more. He was still threatening her, still thought he had power. Even now, after everything he'd done, he thought he could control her with fear. "What do you want to do?" Victor's voice was gentle, no pressure, no expectation, just a question. Harper looked at the message, at the documents, at her parents' faces. She thought about 10 years of making herself smaller, 10 years of silence and invisibility and believing that love meant erasing yourself, 10 years of letting Mason take credit for her work, her ideas, her brilliance. She was done being small. "Let him think he's winning. Let him think I'm scared and alone and desperate." She handed back the phone, met her father's eyes. "And meanwhile we destroy everything he's built. Completely, permanently, until there's nothing left but ashes and regret." Victor nodded, picked up his own phone, started dialing. "Then let's begin." Dawn crept through the study windows like a thief. Gray light on old wood shadows retreating to corners, the fire burned down to embers, casting weak orange glow across documents that covered every available surface. Harper hadn't slept, hadn't eaten, hadn't done anything except read and process and try to understand how her life had become this nightmare. She sat surrounded by evidence of her husband's betrayal, 18 months of surveillance reports, organized chronologically, each page a new knife wound, each revelation worse than the last. April 14th. Subject met with VD at Ritz-Carlton. 4 hours. Room service charged to corporate account. April 15th. Subject transferred $200,000 to offshore account registered in Cayman Islands. Transaction disguised as consulting fee. April 16th. Subject told wife he was at tech conference in Austin. Conference confirmed to be fabricated. No such event scheduled. Harper remembered April 16th. Remembered it perfectly because it was the day she'd decided to tell Mason about wanting to start trying for a baby. She'd spent the morning preparing, made his favorite breakfast, cleaned the apartment, practiced her speech in the mirror about being ready to expand their family. He'd called at noon, said the conference was running long, probably wouldn't be home until late. She'd made lasagna anyway, left it warming in the oven, written him a note on their nicest stationery. "Whenever you get home, I'll be here. I have something wonderful to tell you. Love, your wife." She'd drawn a little heart at the bottom, silly and romantic, the kind of thing she'd done in the early days of their relationship. The lasagna had dried out. The note sat untouched on the counter until morning. He'd come home at 2 a.m. and gone straight to bed without waking her. He'd been at the Ritz-Carlton with Isabella. Harper opened her own calendar from that month, her handwriting, her hopes, her blindness documented in blue ink. April 16th. Mason coming home late. Made his favorite lasagna. Maybe tonight we can talk about baby names. Decided to wait and tell him in person. They'd talked about baby names 3 weeks later over cold takeout. He'd been distracted the whole time, checking his phone every few minutes. She'd thought he was stressed about work. He'd been texting Isabella. Every memory was poisoned now. Every moment she'd cherished rewritten into something ugly. Their first anniversary dinner at that French restaurant, he'd excused himself 3 times to take calls. She'd thought he was important, in demand, the kind of man whose phone never stopped ringing because the world needed him. Now she understood he'd been coordinating with Isabella, planning their next meeting, while his wife waited alone with champagne going flat. The vacation in Cabo, he'd worked most of the trip, laptop out by the pool, conference calls on the balcony. She'd told herself he was dedicated, ambitious, building a future for their family. In reality, he'd been transferring money, falsifying documents, building the framework of fraud that would eventually destroy everything. The night she told him she was pregnant, she replayed it in her mind, watching it now with new eyes. Her excitement, her joy, his face when she handed him the positive test. She'd thought the expression was shock, overwhelmed happiness, the look of a man whose deepest wish had just come true. Now she saw it differently. The calculation behind his eyes, the quick adjustment of plans, the realization that he had a new timeline to work with, a new vulnerability to exploit. He'd held her that night, whispered words about their future, their family, their forever. Lies, all lies, every word. Harper pushed back from the desk. Her body ached. Her baby had been kicking for hours in response to cortisol flooding her system. Her back hurt. Her feet were swollen. Her eyes burned from reading documents under lamplight. She walked to the window. The sun was rising properly now, orange and pink and gold streaking across the sky like a painting. The same sun that had risen on her wedding day. The same sun that would rise tomorrow and the day after, indifferent to human suffering, indifferent to betrayal. The world didn't care about her pain. It kept turning, kept shining, kept going, as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed. Everything. There was a knock at the study door, soft and hesitant. Victor entered carrying 2 cups of coffee. He looked tired, shadows under his eyes, slight tremor in his hands as he set the cups down. He hadn't slept either. "You should be in bed. Dr. Patterson called. She wants to see you this morning. Make sure the stress hasn't affected the baby." "I can't sleep. Every time I close my eyes, I see his face. That smile. I know." "How long?" Harper turned from the window, faced her father. "How long have you known he was a monster?" Victor sat heavily in the chair she'd vacated, and suddenly he looked every one of his 61 years. "Suspected from the beginning. When you first brought him home, there was something about the way he looked at this house, at the art on the walls, at your mother's jewelry. He wasn't looking at things. He was appraising them. Why didn't you tell me?" "I did, 10 years ago. Do you remember?" Harper wanted to say yes. Wanted to believe she would have listened to her father's instincts over her own heart. But she knew the truth. She wouldn't have listened. She'd been in love, blinded by it, grateful that someone like Mason wanted someone like her. The investigation started with routine background checks. Victor took a long sip of coffee, and Harper saw his hand shake slightly. Standard procedure when someone starts dating the heir to the Montgomery fortune. Nothing unusual turned up. Clean record, legitimate business, good reputation. But something felt wrong. The way he proposed so quickly, the way he pushed for a short engagement, the way he seemed more interested in prenup negotiations than wedding planning. Victor's voice was heavy with memory. I kept watching, kept digging, and 6 months after your wedding I found the first irregularities in his financial reports. 6 months, Harper's voice cracked. You've known for 4.5 years. I've suspected for 4.5 years. But suspicion isn't evidence, isn't proof, isn't anything that would hold up in court or convince my daughter that the man she loved was using her. So you just waited, watched. I gathered evidence, built a case, hired the best forensic accountants and private investigators money can buy. Victor set down his coffee cup, met her eyes directly. I was waiting for the right moment, waiting for something that would prove his intentions beyond any doubt. And tonight he gave you that proof. 400 witnesses to assault and conspiracy, video evidence of his complicity, a recorded threat demanding your submission. Tonight he sealed his own fate. I just made sure I was ready to deliver the verdict. Harper processed this, her brilliant mind working through implications even as her heart struggled to keep up. Her father had known all along. He'd known, had watched her marry a monster, watched her build a life with a fraud, watched her get pregnant with a con artist's child. Part of her wanted to be angry, to rage at him for not stopping it, for not protecting her. But another part understood. He had been protecting her, in the only way that would work, by gathering the weapons she'd need when the inevitable came, by building the case that would destroy Mason completely, by making sure that when her world fell apart, she'd have everything she needed to rebuild it. I found something else last night. Victor pulled a thin folder from inside his jacket. Daniel Reeves, Mason's CFO. He's been cooperating with federal investigators for 6 months. Harper's exhaustion lifted slightly. What? Turns out Mason wasn't as careful as he thought. He falsified some documents that implicated Daniel personally. Daniel didn't appreciate being set up as a fall guy. Victor opened the folder to reveal more evidence, names, dates, account numbers, everything the SEC would need to bring RICO charges. The government already knows about the fraud. They've known for months. They were building their case, waiting for the right moment to act. Tonight accelerated their timeline. He looked at Harper with something close to satisfaction. I made some calls. The SEC is announcing an emergency investigation this morning. Trading in Blackstone Technologies will be halted. The next-gen merger will be suspended pending review. 800 million. Harper said it softly, understanding clicking into place. Gone by morning. Just like that, Victor confirmed. And Mason will wake up to discover that the exit strategy he spent 2 years building has evaporated overnight. Harper sank into a chair, the weight of the last 8 hours finally catching up to her. Her legs wouldn't hold her anymore. The scope of what was about to happen was hitting her in waves. Mason thought he was winning right now. In their penthouse, he was probably drinking coffee, planning how to spend her trust fund, calculating how long to keep her committed before filing for divorce, deciding what to name the daughter Harper would never be allowed to raise. He had no idea. No idea that 18 months of surveillance had documented his every crime. No idea that his CFO had betrayed him. No idea that the federal government was hours away from destroying everything he'd built. No idea that his wife's family had been preparing for this moment since before she walked down the aisle. The video. Harper looked up at her father. He said he'd release it if I didn't comply. Already handled. My team accessed his cloud storage overnight. The original video has been deleted from all his devices, replaced with a message. What message? Victor's smile was cold, the smile that had ended careers and destroyed corporations and sent powerful men to prison. Looking for something, VM, the initials of Victor Montgomery, a signature, a warning, a promise of what was coming. For the first time in hours, Harper laughed, brief, sharp, almost hysterical. Her husband had tried to destroy her, had planned for months to strip away her dignity, her freedom, her future. And he'd never realized that the whole time her family was building the weapons that would annihilate him. What happens now? Now we let him panic. Victor stood, and his voice took on the edge of someone who'd spent decades in boardrooms where fortunes were won and lost. My media contacts have been briefed. The story breaks in about 2 hours simultaneously across every major outlet. SEC investigation, fraud allegations, assault charges. By noon, Mason Cole won't be able to book a reservation at McDonald's. And me, you go to the doctor. Make sure the baby is healthy. Make sure you're healthy. His voice softened, the ruthless businessman becoming a father again. Everything else can wait. Your daughter can't. Harper placed her hand on her belly, felt the baby kick in response. Strong, insistent, alive. Whatever else happened, whatever came next, she still had this child, this future, this piece of herself that no one could take away. Okay. She stood, straightened her shoulders despite exhaustion that felt like it went down to her bones. Let's begin. 9 o'clock in the morning. Mason Cole sat in the penthouse he shared with his wife. White robe, bare feet, coffee in a mug that cost $300 because the artist was famous, and Mason liked collecting things that made him feel important. He checked his phone for the 10th time in 5 minutes. No response from Harper. The deadline he'd given her had passed 17 minutes ago. She hadn't come home, hadn't called, hadn't begged for mercy the way he'd expected. Probably with her parents, he decided. Crying on Daddy's shoulder, letting Victor write checks to make the pain go away. That was fine. That was expected. The Montgomerys always thought they could buy their way out of problems. This time money wouldn't help. He had 400 witnesses. He had video evidence. He had doctors willing to testify that Harper had shown signs of mental instability for months. By the time her father's lawyers even figured out what was happening, she'd be committed, and he'd have control of everything. His phone buzzed. Google alert. He opened it casually, expecting the usual tech news, stock prices, industry gossip, maybe some favorable coverage of last night's gala. His PR team had been planting positive stories all week. The headline made his coffee cup slip from his fingers. Breaking: SEC announces emergency investigation into Blackstone Technologies. Trading halted. Hot liquid splashed across his robe, across the marble floor, across the hand-woven Persian rug that Harper had picked out when they moved in together back when he still needed to pretend he valued her opinion. He didn't notice. His fingers were already scrolling, already searching, already finding more alerts than his brain could process. NextGen pulls out. $800 million merger collapses amid fraud allegations. Blackstone CFO turns whistleblower. Federal cooperation revealed. Tech billionaire's empire crumbles. Insider trading investigation launched. No. The word came out as a whisper, then louder, then a shout that echoed off expensive walls in an expensive apartment that suddenly felt like a cage. No, this isn't happening. His phone started ringing. Board members, investors, his lawyer, his PR team. The flood of incoming calls so constant that his screen never stopped vibrating. He ignored them all. With shaking hands, he navigated to his cloud storage, to the folder where he'd saved last night's video. The insurance policy. The leverage that was supposed to keep Harper in line. The folder was empty. Not deleted. Empty. The folder still existed, but the files inside were gone. In their place, a single text file. He opened it with fingers that trembled so badly he could barely tap the screen. Looking for something. V.M. Victor Montgomery. Mason stared at the initials until they blurred, until his vision went gray at the edges, until the reality of what had happened finally broke through his shock. They knew. They'd known all along. While he was planning and plotting and congratulating himself on his cleverness, the Montgomerys had been building their own case, gathering their own evidence, setting their own trap. And he'd walked right into it. 6 months. That's how long it took to transform Harper Sinclair from the invisible woman in beige dresses to the CEO who would walk into Mason Cole's boardroom and take back everything he'd stolen. The transformation started the morning after the gala, when Harper sat in her childhood bedroom staring at walls she hadn't seen in a decade and realized she had a choice. She could stay broken, let Mason's cruelty define her, spend the rest of her life as the woman who'd been humiliated in front of 400 witnesses. Or she could become something he never anticipated. Something dangerous. Diane knocked softly before entering, carrying a breakfast tray Harper hadn't asked for but desperately needed. Scrambled eggs, toast, fruit juice. The kind of meal mothers make when they're trying to heal wounds that go deeper than hunger. Eat. Then we talk about what comes next. Harper picked at the eggs, forcing herself to swallow despite a throat that felt like it was closing. The baby kicked, reminding her that she wasn't just feeding herself anymore. I want to destroy him. The words came out flat, matter-of-fact. Not just beat him, not just win. I want him to lose everything the way he tried to make me lose everything. Diane sat on the edge of the bed, her prosecutor face fully engaged. Then you need to be better than him. Smarter, more prepared, more ruthless. She pulled out a tablet, opened a document that was clearly prepared in advance. Your mother has a plan. The screen showed a timeline stretching 6 months into the future. Phase 1 education. Phase 2 network. Phase 3 preparation. Each phase broken down into weekly goals, daily tasks, measurable outcomes. You're brilliant at technology. But to destroy Mason, you need to understand finance, corporate law, mergers and acquisitions, public relations. You need to be able to walk into a boardroom and command respect from people who've spent decades in business. Harper scrolled through the timeline. Columbia Executive MBA program starting in 2 weeks. Corporate law seminars, leadership coaching, media training, public speaking workshops. This is a full-time job. Revenge is a full-time job. Justice even more so. Diane's voice was gentle but unyielding. The question is whether you're willing to do the work. Harper thought about Mason waking up this morning to SEC investigations and collapsed mergers. Thought about him panicking, scrambling, trying to save himself. Thought about the video he'd made, the smile on his face, the 18 months of lies. She thought about her daughter growing inside her, who would never know her father because her father had been willing to institutionalize her mother for money. When do we start? Columbia Business School accepted her application in 48 hours, a speed that had nothing to do with merit and everything to do with Victor Montgomery making phone calls to people who owed him favors. Harper didn't care. She'd spent 10 years earning things the hard way, staying invisible, pretending her last name didn't open doors. She was done pretending. The first day of the executive MBA program, she walked into a classroom of 40 students who'd paid 6 figures for the privilege of accelerated business education. Most were in their 30s and 40s, successful enough to afford Columbia, but hungry enough to want more. Professor Williams stood at the front, silver-haired and sharp-eyed, the kind of academic who'd built real companies before teaching others how to do it. We have a new student joining us, Harper Sinclair. A few heads turned. Some recognized the Sinclair name and made calculations about media empires and generational wealth. Others saw a pregnant woman in her early 30s and made different calculations about who she'd married, what she was running from, why she was here. Harper, would you like to introduce yourself? She stood aware that every eye in the room was tracking her movement. This was the first test. How she presented herself here would set the tone for everything that came after. I'm Harper Sinclair. I spent 10 years building a $200 million logistics company from the ground up. I wrote the algorithms, designed the systems, negotiated the contracts that brought in 80% of revenue. But my name was never on anything official because the CEO took credit for my work. The room had gone completely silent. She had their attention. I'm here to learn how to make sure that never happens again, and then I'm going to take back what's mine. Someone started clapping. Then another. Within seconds, the entire class was applauding, and Harper felt something shift inside her chest. For 10 years, she'd made herself small enough to fit in Mason's shadow. For 10 years, she'd believed that humility was a virtue, that supporting someone else's dreams was love. She was done being small. Professor Williams smiled, the expression of someone who recognized ambition when he saw it. Welcome to Columbia, Ms. Sinclair. I think you're going to do very well here. The education came in waves, relentless and overwhelming, and exactly what Harper needed. Corporate finance taught her to read balance sheets the way she read code, looking for patterns, finding the logic underneath the numbers, spotting the places where fraud left fingerprints. Mergers and acquisitions showed her how companies were bought and sold, how hostile takeovers worked, how shareholders could be convinced to vote against their own CEOs. Corporate law was a revelation. She learned about fiduciary duty, the legal obligation executives had to act in their company's best interests. She learned about patent law, how intellectual property worked, what constituted theft versus fair use. She learned about securities fraud and the particular ways the SEC prosecuted companies that lied to investors. Every lesson felt like adding ammunition to an arsenal. Every case study was a preview of what she'd do to Mason when the time came. Her professors noticed. Professor Williams pulled her aside after a particularly intense discussion about hostile takeover strategies. "You're in the top 5% of this class, and you've only been here 6 weeks. What's driving you?" Harper met his eyes, decided honesty was simpler than evasion. "I'm taking back a company that was built on my work. The current CEO committed fraud, stole patents, and tried to have me institutionalized to access my trust fund. I need to know enough corporate law to destroy him legally." Williams was quiet for a long moment. Then he smiled. "In that case, let me introduce you to some people who can help." The physical transformation happened in parallel with the education. Diane had arranged for Harper to meet with Margot Chen, a stylist whose client list included senators and Supreme Court justices and women who needed to project power in rooms full of men who didn't want to give it to them. Margot walked around Harper like a sculptor assessing marble, taking in the oversized Stanford hoodie Harper still wore like armor, the jeans that were comfortable but shapeless, the complete absence of makeup or jewelry or anything that suggested she cared about appearance. "You've been dressing like you want to disappear." It wasn't a question. Harper didn't bother denying it. "For 10 years my husband wanted me invisible, so I became invisible. And now I want people to see me walk into a room and immediately know I'm the one in charge." Margot's smile was sharp as a knife. "Then we have work to do." The transformation happened in stages, each one building on the last. First came the professional wardrobe navy suits from Theory and Hugo Boss white silk blouses that were simple but expensive low heels that were comfortable enough for all-day wear, but elegant enough to signal that Harper took herself seriously. Simple pearl studs, a classic watch hair styled in a neat bun that was professional without being severe. The look said, "I belong in boardrooms." Then came the executive phase. Black power suits from Armani and Saint Laurent, higher heels, a Cartier tank watch that had belonged to Harper's grandmother, makeup that was defined and deliberate. The message shifted from, "I belong here," to "I run this place." And finally, saved for the moment when Harper would walk back into Blackstone as its new owner, Margot designed an outfit that would make every photograph, every news story, every witness to Harper's return remember exactly who she was. White, custom-tailored suit in winter white that fit like it had been painted on. Red Louboutin heels, 4 inches of deliberate power. Hair sleek and professional makeup, camera ready, the whole ensemble screaming one message: "I won." Harper stood in front of the mirror in Margot's studio, 8 months pregnant now, wearing the white suit that had been tailored to accommodate her belly, and barely recognized herself. "That's not me. That's exactly you." Margot stood behind her, meeting her eyes in the mirror. "That's who you always were. You just forgot." Diane appeared in the doorway, stopped when she saw her daughter, and for the first time in Harper's memory, her mother's eyes filled with tears. "You look like your grandmother, like every Montgomery woman who ever walked into a room and made powerful men nervous." Harper turned, saw her mother's expression, and felt something unlock in her chest. For 10 years she'd been Harper Cole, invisible wife, silent partner woman in the background. But she'd never stopped being Harper Sinclair, never stopped being a Montgomery, never stopped carrying the DNA of women who'd built empires and changed laws and refused to be diminished by men who underestimated them. She was done hiding that inheritance. While Harper studied and trained and transformed, Victor executed his takeover plan with the precision of someone who'd spent 4 decades in business warfare. The first step was acquiring shares, and he did it so carefully that Mason never saw it coming. Blackstone's stock had tanked after the SEC announcement, dropping from $90 a share to $38 in a single day. Investors were panicking, trying to sell before the price dropped further. Victor bought through 9 different shell companies, small purchases that flew under the radar, never acquiring enough through any single entity to trigger disclosure requirements. By the end of February, he owned 18% of Blackstone Technologies. Mason still thought he controlled the company with his 35% stake. The second step was building alliances with disgruntled shareholders. David Chen owned 8% and was furious about the fraud allegations. Victor met him for dinner at Daniel, a private room where they could talk without being overheard. "I'm buying Blackstone." Victor didn't believe in wasting time on pleasantries. "And I'm putting someone competent in charge." David set down his wine glass, eyebrows raised. "Who?" "My daughter, Harper Sinclair." "Harper Cole. The woman who—" David stopped, recalibrating. "Wait, Sinclair, not Cole. She never should have taken his name. That was my first clue he was wrong for her." Victor's voice was cold with controlled anger. "Harper built Blackstone's technology. She wrote every algorithm, designed every system, negotiated most of the major contracts. Mason took credit and pushed her into the shadows." David was quiet, thinking. He'd been to enough Blackstone events to remember the quiet woman in beige dresses always at Mason's side, but never speaking, never acknowledged. If Harper built what Mason claimed was his innovation, then she's the one who made my investment profitable in the first place. Exactly. And if you sell me your 8% at current market value, I guarantee 15% return on investment in year one after Harper takes over. They shook hands. First alliance secured. Victor repeated the process with 5 other major investors. Margaret Peterson sold her 6%. Robert Maxwell from BlackRock sold 7%. 3 smaller investors sold a combined 12%. By April 1st, Victor controlled 51% of Blackstone Technologies. Enough to call an emergency board meeting. Enough to remove Mason as CEO. Enough to install Harper in his place. Mason still had no idea. He was too busy trying to save himself from federal prosecution, too focused on his own survival to notice his company being bought out from under him. Harper gave birth on a Tuesday in December, 2 months after the gala that had destroyed her marriage. The labor was long and difficult, complicated by stress and preeclampsia that had her doctors worried, but when they finally placed her daughter in her arms, 7 pounds and 4 ounces of perfect fury, Harper felt something settle inside her. Lily Rose Sinclair. She named her daughter after her grandmother and great-grandmother, a lineage of strong women who'd survived worse than unfaithful husbands. No Cole. No reference to the man who'd tried to steal her, institutionalize her mother, take everything that mattered. Victor stood at the window of the hospital room, looking out at Manhattan spread below them like a promise. She's beautiful, strong, like her mother, like her grandfather. Harper adjusted Lily in her arms, this tiny human who had no idea yet what kind of world she'd been born into. "She's a Montgomery. That means something. It means she'll never have to make herself small for anyone." 3 months later, Harper stood in front of the mirror in her childhood bedroom, Lily sleeping in a bassinet nearby, and tried on the white suit for the first time since giving birth. Margot had come to the estate to do final adjustments, letting out seams where Harper's body had changed, taking in others where she'd lost the pregnancy weight through stress and sleepless nights, and the particular exhaustion of new motherhood combined with business school. The suit fit perfectly. Harper looked at her reflection and saw someone Mason wouldn't recognize, wouldn't be able to diminish, wouldn't be able to erase. 2 weeks. Diane stood in the doorway, tablet in hand, tracking the final timeline. April 15th, tax day. Victor thought it was poetic. Everything's ready. The shareholders have all signed. The lawyers have prepared the paperwork. The SEC has coordinated timing. At 9 a.m., Victor files the change of control notification. At 10 a.m., emergency board meeting. By 11 a.m., you're the CEO of Blackstone Technologies. Harper touched the white fabric, felt the quality of the material, the weight of what she was about to do. What if I can't do this? What if I walk in there and see him and just freeze? Diane crossed the room, took her daughter's face in both hands. You won't freeze. You're a Sinclair. We don't freeze. We don't run. We don't forgive men who try to destroy us. Her voice was fierce with love and fury. You walk in there, you look him in the eye, and you take back everything he stole, not for revenge, for justice. What's the difference? Revenge destroys you. Justice rebuilds you. You're not doing this to hurt Mason. You're doing this because you deserve to be recognized for what you built. Because your daughter deserves to see her mother refuse to stay silent. Because every woman who's ever had her work stolen needs to see that theft has consequences. Harper closed her eyes, breathed deep, felt Lily stir in the bassinet as if sensing her mother's resolve. When she opened her eyes, she was ready. April 15th dawned clear and cold, the kind of spring morning where Manhattan looked sharp-edged and unforgiving. Harper woke at 5 a.m. fed. Lily handed her to the nanny Diane had hired and spent 2 hours getting ready with the careful precision of someone preparing for battle. The white suit, the red heels, hair and makeup done by professionals Diane had brought to the house. Every detail perfect, every element calculated to send a message. At 8:30 the town car pulled up. Victor waited by the door wearing the same expression he'd worn when she was 7 and teaching her to ride a bike, proud and protective and absolutely certain she could do this. Ready. Harper looked at her father. This man who'd spent 8 years building weapons she could use, who'd never doubted her, even when she doubted herself, who'd waited patiently for her to be ready to fight back. Let's go take back my company. The drive into Manhattan was quiet. Harper watched the city pass outside tinted windows, thought about Mason waking up in their old penthouse, probably drinking coffee, probably confident that the worst was behind him. The SEC investigation was ongoing, but his lawyers had convinced him he could fight it. The merger had collapsed, but he still had the company. Harper had disappeared, which meant she'd accepted defeat. He had no idea what was about to hit him. The car pulled up to Blackstone Technologies headquarters at 9:40. A building Harper had helped design where she'd spent 10 years writing code in corners and conference rooms where she'd been invisible. She stepped out of the car into flashbulbs. Victor had tipped off photographers, made sure this moment would be documented. Harper in white radiating power walking into a building that was about to become hers. "Ms. Sinclair," a reporter pushed forward. "Is it true you're taking over Blackstone?" Harper stopped, turned to face the cameras and spoke the words she'd been practicing for months. "I'm not taking over Blackstone. I'm taking back what I built." Another reporter. "What about your ex-husband, Mason Cole?" Harper smiled, cold and precise. "You'll have to ask him. In about 10 minutes. She walked into the lobby while cameras flashed behind her. Employees stopped and stared these people who'd worked alongside her for years, who'd seen her as Mason's assistant, his wife, his shadow. Now they saw something else, saw the woman in white striding past security like she owned the building, because in about 20 minutes she would. The boardroom was on the 47th floor, glass walls overlooking Manhattan, massive mahogany table with 16 seats. Mason sat at the head in the CEO's chair, trying to project confidence he clearly didn't feel. His suit was expensive, but rumpled his face, drawn his eyes, carrying the particular exhaustion of someone who'd spent months fighting federal investigators and losing. Around the table sat 12 board members: David Chen, Margaret Peterson, Robert Maxwell. 3 other investors who'd sold to Victor. 5 smaller shareholders who were about to learn that the company they'd invested in had just changed hands. And Isabella Cross, vice president of marketing, no shares but present, because Mason still thought she was on his side. Mason saw Harper walk in and went through a cascade of expressions: confusion, recognition, disbelief, fear, anger, all in the space of 3 seconds. "Harper, what are you doing here?" Harper didn't look at him. She walked to the opposite end of the table, the power position facing Mason's CEO chair, and set down her briefcase with a decisive click. "Good morning, gentlemen. Thank you for attending this emergency meeting." Victor entered behind her, stood against the wall as observer rather than participant. Marcus Kane, the corporate lawyer Victor had hired 3 months ago, followed with a recording device. "You can't be here. This is a board meeting. You're not—" "I'm the majority shareholder." Harper opened her briefcase, began distributing folders to each board member with calm efficiency. "In front of you is the SEC filing completed at 9 a.m. this morning. Victor Sinclair, acting as my proxy, has acquired 51% of Blackstone Technologies." She sat down at the far end of the table, meeting Mason's eyes across 12 feet of polished wood. "As of this moment, your position is under review." The board members flipped through folders, shock spreading across faces as they absorbed the information. David Chen was trying not to smile. Margaret Peterson looked satisfied. The smaller investors who hadn't known about the takeover looked confused and worried. Mason stood, voice rising. "This is a hostile takeover. We can fight this." Robert Maxwell barely glanced up from the documents. "Mason, she owns 51%. There's nothing to fight. She's my ex-wife. This is revenge. Personal vendetta." Harper's voice stayed level, controlled the tone she'd learned in 6 months of executive training. "This isn't revenge, Mason. This is justice." She stood, walked to the presentation screen, clicked the remote to begin the slideshow she'd prepared with the help of Columbia professors and Victor's legal team. "Let's discuss why I'm here. Shall we start with the 37 patents you forged my signature to steal?" The first slide appeared. Patent numbers, filing dates, original registrations under Harper Sinclair's name. Then transfer documents supposedly signed by Harper, but actually forged by Mason, emails between Mason and his paralegal discussing how to use the signature from her employee contract without Harper noticing. The board went silent. Several members leaned forward, reading the evidence with the attention of people realizing they'd been complicit in something criminal. "Patent theft is a federal crime. Penalty up to 10 years in prison." Mason tried to interrupt, but Marcus stepped forward. "Mr. Cole, you'll have a chance to respond. Let Miss Sinclair finish her presentation." The second slide showed financial fraud. James Morrison, the CFO Victor had recruited to Harper's team, appeared via video conference. "I've audited Blackstone's financials for the past 3 years. Revenue was systematically inflated by reporting pending contracts as closed. Actual 2024 revenue $146 million, reported revenue $178 million. That's $32 million in fabricated income reported to shareholders and the SEC. Mason's face had gone pale. The third slide revealed the attempted sale to Titan Logistics. Contract fully executed, signed by Mason without board approval, in direct violation of corporate bylaws requiring board vote for any transaction over $10 million. Margaret Peterson looked at Mason with open contempt. "You tried to sell our company without telling us. I was going to tell you, I just needed to negotiate first." Marcus pulled out another document. "The contract was fully executed. The only reason it hasn't closed is because this takeover voided it. If we hadn't intervened, you would have sold Blackstone, paid out investors at a fraction of fair value, and walked away with $80 million, without ever asking the board." The room erupted. Board members shouting over each other, demanding answers, threatening lawsuits. Mason tried to respond, but his voice was drowned out by fury from people who'd trusted him and were just now realizing that trust had been weaponized against them. Harper waited for the noise to die down, then advanced to the final slide. The truth about Blackstone's success laid out in timeline form. Every major innovation attributed to Harper with supporting documentation. Code signatures, design documents, email trails showing her negotiating contracts Mason claimed credit for. "I built this company. Mason put his name on my work and convinced you all he was the genius behind our success." She turned to face the board, and her voice carried the weight of 10 years of silence finally breaking. "Every major innovation, every contract, every system, I built them. Mason's contribution was taking credit." Mason slammed his hand on the table. "This is bullshit. I built this company, I got the funding, I managed the business. You were just code, just tech support." The words hung in the air, confirming everything Harper had presented. Just code, just tech support. The same dismissal he'd used for a decade now, spoken in front of witnesses who could hear exactly how he'd erased her. Harper didn't raise her voice, didn't need to. When she spoke, every person in the room leaned forward to hear. "When I left 6 months ago, delivery times increased 22%. Revenue dropped 18%. 3 hospital systems didn't renew contracts. The company you claim to have built started falling apart the moment I wasn't there to hold it together." She paused, walked toward Mason slowly, deliberately. "You want to know the real difference between you and me? I was the company. You were the salesman who took credit. There's a difference." David Chen stood. I motion to remove Mason Cole as CEO effective immediately. Margaret Peterson. I second. Marcus, all in favor. The vote was devastating. Victor's 51% yes. Every investor who'd sold shares to Victor yes. Even two of the smaller shareholders who'd seen enough yes. 84% voted to remove Mason Cole. Motion passes. Mason Cole is removed as CEO. Second motion, install Harper Sinclair as CEO of Blackstone Technologies. Same vote, same result. In less than 5 minutes, Harper had gone from invisible ex-wife to CEO of the company she'd built. Mason looked around the table, seeing nothing but closed faces, people who'd decided he was a liability they could no longer afford. Security appeared at the door. Not hotel security this time. Blackstone's own people following the new CEO's orders. Escort Mr. Cole from the building. Mason grabbed his phone, his laptop. Marcus, leave those. Company property. These are mine. Everything in this building belongs to Blackstone Technologies. You no longer work here. Leave it. Mason's hands shook as he set down the devices. He looked at Harper, tried one last desperate appeal. Harper, you think you've won? You think you can run this company without me? Harper stood at the head of the table now, the CEO position that had always been hers in everything but title. Mason, I ran this company for 10 years. You just sat in the chair I built. The only difference now, my name will finally be on the door. He was escorted out past employees who'd watched him cut corners and take credit and finally face consequences. Past the lobby where Harper had entered in white like a conquering army. Out onto the street where photographers captured every moment of his defeat. Harper didn't watch him go. She turned to the board, pulled up a new presentation, and began outlining her 12-month plan to recover, revenue, rebuild trust, and transform Blackstone into the company it should have been all along. By noon, the story was everywhere. Tech CEO ousted by ex-wife who built his empire. Photographs of Harper in white radiating power. Video of Mason being escorted out in disgrace. By 6 p.m., Harper had given a press conference that was already going viral. Her words about loyalty, not requiring invisibility about love, never demanding you erase yourself about taking back what was stolen resonated with millions of women who'd seen their work dismissed, their contributions, ignored their brilliance, attributed to men who'd done nothing but sign the papers. 6 months later, Blackstone's revenue was up 30%. Stock price had recovered and climbed higher than before the scandal. Harper had expanded to 5 new states, launched the AI predictive system she'd been developing in secret, and become the face of a company that was finally being recognized for what it had always been, her creation, not Mason's. Mason faced trial for securities fraud, patent theft, and breach of fiduciary duty. He lost everything: money, reputation, freedom. The man who'd tried to institutionalize his pregnant wife spent 18 months in minimum security prison and walked out with nothing but probation debt and the knowledge that the woman he'd underestimated had built an empire from the ashes of his betrayal. Harper stood in her office on the day the verdict came through, Lily sleeping in a bassinet nearby, and felt not triumph but something quieter. Justice. Completion. The knowledge that she'd taken the worst thing that ever happened to her and transformed it into proof that talent couldn't be stolen, only delayed. Her phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. A woman's voice, young and scared. Ms. Sinclair? My name is Emma. I read about you in the Wall Street Journal. I work at a tech company and I built our main product, but my boss is taking credit and I don't know what to do. Harper smiled, sat down at her desk, pulled out a legal pad. Emma, tell me everything, and then we'll make a plan, because you deserve credit for your work, and I'm going to help you get it. She spent the next hour listening, advising, connecting Emma with lawyers and investigators and resources, building a network of women who refused to stay silent while men stole their brilliance. This was the real victory. Not destroying Mason, though that had been satisfying. The real victory was using her story to help others, to show that survival wasn't just about enduring, but about building something better from the wreckage. As the sun set over Manhattan, Harper looked out her office window at the city spread below. Somewhere out there, Mason was starting over with nothing. Somewhere out there, Isabella was working retail after being blacklisted from every logistics company in America. Somewhere out there, David Chen and Margaret Peterson and Robert Maxwell were telling other investors about the brilliant woman they'd underestimated for years. But Harper wasn't thinking about any of them. She was thinking about Emma, about the hundreds of women who'd reached out since her story broke about Lily sleeping peacefully nearby, about the future she was building not through revenge but through the simple, radical act of refusing to stay invisible. Silence isn't weakness, but it can't be permanent, and Harper Sinclair's CEO mother survivor had finally learned to use her voice.